Welcome everyone to the webinar. This is the CoC Action Agenda webinar, building a more responsive, collaborative, and action-oriented continuum of care. Today, the presenters are myself, Dave Thomas, Vice President of Community Partnerships at All Chicago, and Maura McCauley, Director of Homeless Prevention, Policy, and Planning from Chicago's Department of Family and Support Services.
Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. There will be a recording of this presentation and slides will also be sent out afterwards. We're going to ask you to submit any questions throughout the webinar, but we will hold and do questions at the end after we finish the presentation. If you have any audio or visual issues, just click the raise hand icon and someone will help you out. And then again, you can use the chat box, the question chat box to submit questions throughout the presentation.
And the objectives for today's webinar are as follows. The purpose of the CoC Action Agenda, which comes from the Chicago Strategy Memo, is adopted by the CoC board this past June, and hopefully everyone has had a chance to review that memo. Second, the CoC Action Agenda and community involvement. We'll talk through what the Action Agenda is and how it will roll out with community input and action. And then lastly, next steps of implementation. What's needed to move from a build-out stage to full implementation.
So we want to open the discussion today with an overview of a recent account of the number of households experiencing homelessness right now in Chicago. This is from our new dashboard to end homelessness. This is the way that we are tracking people experiencing homelessness in our community right now. And we just wanted to kind of use this to set the tone for the conversation. Our system has made impressive strides, and all of us in this continuum of care have been working extremely hard, but there's a general agreement that we need to do more, and the action agenda and the strategies we'll talk about today are one way that we can do this. About a year ago, national consultants from the Corporation for Supportive Housing took the CoC membership through a series of interviews and community discussions about our strengths and opportunities as a continuum of care and what we wanted to change. The 4 strategies that you see here are the summary of that process. And they're essentially talking about flexibility to organize or work in a task-oriented way to achieve Plan 2.0 goals. The fact that we need dedicated and called out staff to facilitate that process as a backbone organization. That we need to ensure that we have a board that can align resources with the activities and needs that are identified by the work groups driving the work. And that as we set targets, we need to build political will to ensure that we expand the housing inventory that is really critical to ending homelessness. So we're now moving from a concept in these 4 strategies to implementation of those strategies. And so this is what we're calling the CoC Action Agenda. This is really the new name that you've been hearing about, hopefully, over the past month or so. And essentially, the Action Agenda is a work plan and a strategy to build a more responsive, collaborative, and action-oriented homeless response and housing system. And as Dave said, these strategies were already endorsed by the CoC Board of Directors. And this plan and the Action Agenda is what we are now moving forward and taking to the CoC. What we see as some of the benefits of the Action Agenda are that the strategies will help us improve our efficiency by identifying tasks and activities our CoC needs to take to create, sorry, I lost my train of thought. we're working to improve our efficiency by identifying tasks and activities our CoC needs to take, and then creating a work structure around it. The action agenda allows us to use a shared vision and a roadmap with specific work plans that will help us establish collaboration, transparency, and accountability. We're wanting to establish a work structure that allows decision-making authority to rest with the work groups and the committees that drive the work. And then we want to create a board that has a new focus and responsibility to approve high-level policies, but also align resources around the work group activities and data projections around the needs of the CoC, especially housing resources, which has been a noticeable gap in our system for the last several years. And then I think I also want to just add here that all of this that we're talking about would be changes in the way that we do our work. But aside from the board component, we're really not changing the charter itself. The thrust of the charter remains the same. As we go forward, I think there's some critical things here that make the timing of this really important. The strategies have been presented to and endorsed by the mayor's office. There is interest and political will to align with the strategies that are put forth. We've been working in conjunction with the mayor's office and other city agencies to find people in influencing positions who are willing to bring critical housing resources to our CoC by joining the board. That is something that's in process. Again, this has come out of a year-long discussion process with the community. So we've been talking about this, and we're hoping to move this into implementation now. And I think we've also learned, and you'll see remnants in the strategy and in the action agenda that are reflective of lessons that we've learned from the Ending Veteran Homelessness Initiative, in that we established a structure within that initiative that really allowed the work and the design of the system to fall within the people doing the work groups. And then there was a leadership team component of that initiative who was really tasked with making sure from a high level we were making progress on our goal of ending veteran homelessness, and then bringing housing resources and aligning policies across different systems to help us achieve those goals. And that is something that that has been very successful, and that we've reduced veteran homelessness by 30% as a community. And while we're not there, it's a model that is seen to work.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the action agenda and what it actually looks like in practicality and in structure. And so the action agenda itself has three main parts that need to be working together to make the goal of ending homelessness a reality. The most important part is the work groups and committees that will be led by project managers who will pull together experts from the community and utilize work plans, fluid work plans, to achieve clear goals for the lines of work or action, which we'll review shortly, what those 12 lines are. So the work groups really are going to be will be doing most of the work and helping to set some policy as well. And then working closely with the work groups and committees will be lead project managers. The lead project managers will be responsible for weekly meetings with all the 12 lines of work project managers to support their work, to ensure that goals are being met, and to help them overcome challenges that they bring to the table. The weekly meetings will also be used to improve communication between the 12 lines of work and build better collaborations throughout the work. And then finally, the lead project managers will be responsible for reporting back to the CoC Board of Directors and the Mayor's Office. The lead project managers will keep the board and the Mayor's Office updated on the work plans and the progress and ask for their help to overcome challenges systematically that are identified by the work groups and committees on the ground. So as I mentioned, the committees and work group will be key in driving the work to end homelessness. The community's voice, their knowledge, and their expertise will help influence and shape policy. So for the improved communication, I'm going to go through the 4 parts of the circle there. For improved communication, that's going to be between all the lines of work, as we're calling them, as well as improving communication up to the CoC board and the mayor's office. This will help ensure that all parts of the action agenda are on the same page and working together. The second part, your voice and expertise at the table, is about community leaders and experts who are identified or will be identified to help support and influence the areas of work and action. The committees and work groups will meet only when necessary to get work done. Currently, almost all CoC committees meet monthly, but the action agenda will move from having prescribed times to meet to meeting only to take action. This may look different depending on the type of work to be accomplished. So for instance, it may still mean that there's ongoing meetings of committees, but they also could be time-limited work groups. They could be focus groups. They could be one-time meetings with the community based on a certain topic, or they could be about holding community sessions for feedback. And then lastly, the goal is to have the committees and work groups be as nimble and responsive to change as possible. The committees and work groups become more action-oriented and have flexibility to adapt to changing needs and emerging issues as things move on. So the next 3 slides lay out the 12 lines of work where community involvement will be vital. The lines of work are all based on Plan 2.0 and are just a starting point. We anticipate that as the action agenda rolls out, we may need to refine these lines of work or add lines of work, or ideally have less focus on lines of work as work is completed or accomplished. And then they won't need as much of attention. This is where the nimbleness and the flexibility of the action agenda can be useful. So at the end of the webinar, we'll have a link that has descriptions of these 12 lines of work, but I'm going to give a brief overview of the 12. For communications, it's about internal communications throughout the CoC, as well as external communications about the CoC's accomplishments to the community at large. For crisis system transition, that's about recognizing the need for a crisis system, but fine-tuning it so that individuals and families' episodes of homelessness are as short as possible. For coordinated entry system, now that coordinated entry has rolled out this past year, we're beginning to see its impact and the need to continuously improve it. For performance data and research, this area of work will be a key activity for ensuring that all programs in the system are performing at their best and continue to have a positive impact on reducing the number of homeless in our community. For system funding, we'll ensure that we maintain or grow our HUD funding each year while identifying system-level needs that require funding, either private or public dollars that are not in existence now. For pipeline expansion, we'll use the gaps analysis to project our need for housing units and shift or develop resources to match that need. For employment and income, we're helping to build self-sufficiency through employment and mainstream benefits. And for the youth line of work, it's about understanding their unique circumstances and the needs to develop an age-appropriate response system. For the veterans line of work, it's about continuing to build on the Ending Veterans Homelessness Initiative success and become the largest city to end veteran homelessness. With HMIS, it's continuously building out a top-notch data-driven system which can also connect to other systems as we grow. Supporting change is about addressing the current changes going on and building a system that supports change in general in the future to remain flexible and nimble. And then lastly, the 12th line of work is the street response, addressing the street homeless and their unique needs. So what are some benefits to this infrastructure shift? So moving to an action-oriented infrastructure under the action agenda, well, right now we know that the CoC structure it can be complicated, and committees don't always communicate with each other consistently or to the board, and work gets done relatively slow, and there aren't enough clear-cut goals and benchmarks. This new structure will change all of that, where communication, collaboration, and action-oriented work will be built into the infrastructure. Groups will meet, like I said, when there's work to get done, or not meet when there's no work to do. And then this next slide shows sort of an example of what we're getting at here. So with improved communication and an improved communication and response system can look like. So for example, if we take the coordinated entry system, as it rolls out, we already are aware of the needs of additional units. So the pipeline expansion will be key in addressing that need. But also, as programs will be evaluated in the local evaluation process on coordinated entry implementation, we'll need to look at their performance based on data from coordinated entry. So that's where supporting change would be important in terms of giving organizations the data that they need. Also recognizing that coordinated entry is a huge system change, technical assistance and capacity building under supporting change will continue to be a need. So maybe the rollout of more trainings or targeted trainings for providers so they understand the coordinated entry system better. And then finally, as gaps in the coordinated entry system are identified beyond the needs for additional units, funding for other parts of the coordinated entry system will need a focus as well, and we'll need to reach out to either private funders or seek additional public funding for those gaps. All of this need for collaboration will take place within the new structure of the action agenda and the project managers speaking together on a weekly basis. So we've sort of laid out what the lines of work will look like, but we want to make sure that the community feels that they'll have a voice in this and will lean on their expertise and knowledge to make this happen. So as previously mentioned, the action agenda will depend on experts in the community to shape the policies and the work needed to end homelessness. We are in a process of developing an online system to recruit and identify committee and work group members. Diversity will be vital to this process, and all groups and work groups and committees will be open. Work group membership will be based on expertise and knowledge and not a prescribed slate as we currently have it. And please look for more information next month or in early 2018. We understand that communication will be key to successful implementation, and here are some ways we plan to work or to have the work communicated and increase transparency. Work plans will be published on the Action Agenda website that we've recently created and emailed to the community. Work plan updates will be emailed monthly so people will know the progress that's happening within the work plans. Project managers will report work plan progress at the board meetings. And Action Agenda alert emails about implementation progress will be sent at least monthly as well, or more as needed.
So to really complement and support a new potential work structure for the CoC, the strategy, the action agenda is also recommending a refocus of the CoC board and a change in the composition of the CoC board. So the focus and the role of the board is intended to shift from its current focus. The board will really approve high-level policies that need to be codified system-wide that come from the work group. And then the board will be responsible for aligning resources to help support the work forward. So to do this, the need, the other thing is that I think the data from the work groups and from the whole dashboard will help drive the overall vision and focus of the board to help them determine where resources could be aligned to support the work. So the new composition, the proposed composition of the CoC board will reduce the size of the board to 15 to 18 seats. The makeup of the board will still include critical voices from the SPC, the Service Providers Commission, and the Lived Experience Commission. We're proposing to have a representative from the Mayor's Office, from the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services, the Chicago Housing Authority, 1 to 2 private foundation representatives, a business leader representative, a faith-based organization, and then 5 to 8 at-large representatives who could be from public, city, state, or federal organizations or academic organizations. This will give us some flexibility from year to year to determine which systems or at-large organizations are really critical in terms of resources and policy making to help us achieve the goals in our work plan at the current time. The other key piece of this board composition is that we would be asking that the representatives are people with decision-making and resource allocation authority, so that they can directly make commitments or directly take things back to problem solve within their organizations about how to support the work. So in order to move our implementation forward in alignment with our current charter, because we are operating under an existing charter, there's a recommendation that needs to go to the board of directors, the current CoC board, and to the full CoC. We have a current committee, the Charter Amendment and Interpretation Committee, that is tasked with bringing recommendations for charter amendments to the full CoC. So we took this to the CAIC committee, and a recommendation came out of that group about how to present this on to the full committee, or to the full CoC. And so the recommendation is basically, 1, to ask the CoC board to approve a demonstration period to allow for the flexibility in the charter to test out the action agenda work structure that Dave just walked through. So it's not actually going to change the current committee structure in a formal way in the charter. It's just asking for approval for our community to operate in this task-oriented way. And then if we, as a community, decide that this structure or some version of a different kind of structure is a way that we want to continue our work, we could come back and make a charter amendment to make that change, to codify it, or codify flexibility, basically, which is, I think, the thrust of what we're trying to do as a community overall. The piece about bringing the board into an alignment and policy-making function, because it does include a composition change of the board, that is actually a formal amendment. So the board composition that I just walked through, along with language about the number of the board members and their positions in the board, in their organizations, will be part of that recommendation. So in terms of what's coming next and how the decisions will be made, next Thursday, November 30th, there's a special Continuum of Care Board of Directors meeting where these recommendations will be presented on again and discussed and voted on. The ask of the board is to endorse the recommendation, and then hoping that we receive the endorsement from the board, that would then go to the full CoC for approval at the December 7th all CoC meeting. Any charter changes or amendments are required to go through the LCOC. So that's really an important time to participate and be part of the discussion and vote. We are going to continue communicating about what's happening, how you can get involved through Action Agenda emails. The project management team is working with TA consultants right now to continue building out work plans. And as those are completed, those will be shared with the community through email and on the All Chicago website. As we get the survey that Dave talked about posted and solicit membership for different lines of work, we will populate work groups and start getting to work. The other really important piece that we need to fill in for this is, as we've talked about, we're wanting to be driving towards really tangible, measurable goals that help us kind of see the progress that we're making with Plan 2.0. And so as a community, we'll need to develop what those actual targets are that we're working towards. And then if this board approval is, or when it's approved, hopefully, we will need to finish recruiting and then solidify the new board slate. So those are some of the next steps. So just a reminder to kind of take us back to how we got to this point. Back about a year ago is when CSH consultants began engaging the community. They did a SWOT analysis, and then they brought that SWOT analysis back to the community for feedback and discussion about steps that we could take to move our system forward. That resulted in the strategy document that we've discussed in this presentation, and the CoC board affirmed those strategies and kind of authorized the CoC to continue working towards implementation. And then this was presented at the LCOC meeting back in June. There was a community-wide webinar in July, and over the summer, an advisory team for the implementation group worked with the TA team to identify these lines of action and all of the work that needed to happen in each line to move our system forward. And then for the last 2.5 months, we have been going out to different commissions, committees, small groups, having individual conversations about, the proposed recommendations to move the work forward. If you've been part of those conversations, you've seen it evolve over time. So where we are landing now is based on a tremendous amount of feedback that we've received in all of these conversations, which has been really critical and important to bringing a recommendation that we hope people feel ready for. So that's the end of our formal presentation and overview of the action agenda and our recommendations for moving forward to implementation. So we'd like to open this up for questions. At this point, we don't have any questions in the chat box, so I'm going to give folks a few minutes to see if anything has triggered for you, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, please let us know if we can clarify anything or address any burning issues or concerns that you might have. We're happy to hear from you. there's any questions or comments, we'll still take those.
Jennifer Nelson feels it looks like, okay, here comes the rest of your question. Okay. So the question is, Dave, you talked about a huge system plan and funding. How does that relate to the current funding?
So we definitely know that a good deal of money that goes to the homeless service system, about half of the funding that we know of is HUD CoC funding, and the other half are other sources such as Local Housing Trust Fund or HOPWA dollars or CHA or other things that are on the HIC, the Housing Inventory Account. And I think what we're looking at with the system funding is once we do a really good gaps analysis of what's missing in our system or what the need is, then we'll start to see if we need to either shift our current HUD resources or through the NOFA process increase certain kinds of units, or maybe going to the board, the board we're proposing, who will be from different systems or different agencies that hopefully could then say, oh, okay, we support that and we'll dedicate funding or shift our funding to meet the need of the larger CoC. And we're also, so to be quite honest, we don't have everything planned out, but our dream is that we get a funders collaborative together of like private foundations to see if we can bring them together so that we're looking at funding things more systematically than maybe certain things here and certain things there, that we're looking at it more comprehensively and collaboratively as a system. Hope that answers your question.
Great. And I think the hope is that the funders collaborative will actually, as the work starts happening within the work groups, if there's anything that requires a tool or a data match or something that would require funding in order for it to move forward, that we would also have a network of local private funders who would be able to support those things that aren't often covered by government funding, and that could happen in somewhat more real time than it's able to right now. Having this kind of unified vision would also help our local funder community prioritize what they fund based on what the CoC is requesting in a coordinated way. So just to follow up on that before we move to the next one, Jennifer is following up with a question, does the shift mean defunding programs?
No, our goal is to make sure that programs that are functioning as at the highest quality and highest level they can. And I think down the road, I think we'll look at, what's the need in the community. We've always done that, but I think this allows us to have a more comprehensive approach. So our intent is definitely not to defund any agency or program. It's to look at how everything's working systematically and collaboratively. And once we have all the right pieces in place and the data, then to look at the system overall and what's needed.
Okay, so the next question is from Ken McCauley. So who will the CoC be electing at its December meeting? Seats per the current charter or seats based on the new board size and configuration?
So that's a great question, a little tricky question, but how we're proceeding with this, just from a procedural way, is because CAIC, or because the charter has some clear-cut guidelines already about seating next year's board, that process has already been followed by the membership committee, and a slate will be presented at the all CoC meeting on December 7th in its current form. So that vote has to take place. It's mandated that that vote takes place at the winter all CoC meeting, which is the December one, and then the following recommendation, the following recommendation that we just talked through, will go to the board, and if that's voted on and approved, then we will maybe ideally, and we haven't figured this out, but ideally have some kind of transition period to seat a new board with the existing board in place, because we have to move in that direction anyway.
Right, and we want it to be, we want it to be a meaningful transition. So I think everyone wants to make sure that the knowledge of the existing board and the experience is part of a transition process. So I think that's part of a ongoing community discussion about how that transition would happen and how fast it would happen. But it wouldn't be that a newly configured board would begin the year.
Any other questions or comments, concerns? We want to make sure we're addressing folks' concerns and issues, especially going into the December 7th All CoC meeting. We won't be able to do a full presentation there, so we want to make sure that we were doing these webinars and that people have the opportunity to address their concerns or questions here. So please. So we'll still take questions. We have until 2 o'clock if folks want to stay on the line. But just to show you some information where you can see some more documents and information from us, please check out the website with the action agenda. Sign up for action alerts. You see the links there. And like we said earlier, we'll send the PowerPoint out, or you'll have access to the PowerPoint to click on these links. And then also, we encourage you, if you have individual questions, and feel free to reach out to Maura and or myself with questions. Our emails are posted there.
Okay, so Ken is asking, will there still be votes on the original CAIC amendment changes?
So I believe so. I actually literally today have a call with the board officers to talk about how that's going to work, but I believe they have to go to the All CoC at the All CoC meeting.
And then Jennifer followed up asking, what if this is not approved at the All CoC meeting?
That's a great question. So we haven't thought that far because we are kind of moving we'd like to move forward with this, and so we've been putting all our planning and communications around this. We would just have to regroup and determine next steps.
And I think we're really trying to do this in a meaningful way. So while we're presenting to you the concepts and trying to give you some specific ways that if this moves forward, that you could be involved, and we would really need you to be involved. It's not all hashed out, and so the reason that we're asking, part of the recommendation is asking the CoC to approve flexibility from this charter is so that we can take the next year to work as a community to figure out what is the best way. We've talked about in other settings that may mean that existing committees refocus their work towards one of these 12 lines of action. It may mean that people decide to get involved in different things. But we feel like as a community, and I think this came out loud and clear in the SWOT analysis, but also just in our general day-to-day operations within our committees, that we're feeling very like the charter prescribed structure doesn't fit the needs of our CoC anymore. And so we are just really hoping that people will walk with us as the collective CoC to try this and to support a change in a board composition that's really asking our systems leaders to be accountable to the needs of the CoC and to really be clear about what's needed to create a healthy, functional crisis response and rehousing system. That's not something that we've had, and I think the opportunity now is that there is some political will, and we just don't know how long that will, how long that will be in place. So I think we definitely need the CoC support, and we're hoping that those things will help people decide to move forward.
Again, just a last call for any questions or comments. We want to make sure we're hearing from you. Okay, well, we're gonna, looks like no more questions are coming in, but again, I wanna encourage you to, you still have the information up there on your screen about the website and signing up for action alerts, but please reach out to Maura or myself if you have, you just wanna talk about this one-on-one or get more clarifications about this one-on-one. We are happy to speak with anyone. So, thank you all for your time today and for your great questions, and thank you for taking the time for this webinar today.